Hello there. Today we're going to talk about climate change and the effects that it has on coral ecosystems. So first, what is coral and why is the ecosystem important? So what coral is an invertebrate animal. Okay, so it actually falls under the phylum of Cnidaria. You might see that as C. Cnidaria. So it is actually a soft-bodied animal that has an exoskeleton. That exoskeleton is built with this molecule, CaCO3 2-. This is calcium carbonate. This is a really important molecule for that coral ecosystem and the coral animal itself. So, what a coral reef is, you've heard this term coral reef possibly. It is basically colonies of many individual coral organisms. So, your coral reefs, the colonies, are going to actually be very, very rare. If you think of the actual massiveness of the ocean, it's going to cover less than 1% of the ocean floor. It's going to be habitat to 25% of marine organisms. So that's going to be equivalent to about 2 million different species. So a half a billion people. So if we want to think about it in terms of persons, a half a billion people, they're going to rely on reef fish for food. So the coral, as you can see here, this is your beautiful, beautiful coral reef. Okay. You have organisms, microscopic organisms, that are going to live in and within and around the actual coral reefs. Then you have small, maybe a little bit larger microscopic organisms that feed upon those. And then larger organisms that feed upon those, and larger ones that feed upon those. And here comes the shark. Oh, wait. Oh, no, maybe that's it right there. I don't know, but you get the point. This fish is food for somebody, and this fish is eating something. And it really is boiling down to the ecosystem that the coral reef provides itself, the habitat. So let's talk about if that ecosystem collapses. And so let's go ahead and put together what the ecosystem could look like, the actual food web. It's not a food chain because it's not linear. It is intermixed with many different links. And so they don't really call it a food chain unless it's linear from one to the next and then done. But it's a web. So let's go ahead and we can look at the top down or we can look at the bottom up. Since we're talking about coral reef and what it provides for the ecosystem, I'm going to choose to look from the bottom up. So here are your corals. This is your coral and this is your coral. Your coral is going to house something called zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae are microscopic organisms that are going to live inside the coral. And what they're going to do is they are going to photosynthesize and provide the coral with food. Okay? Coral is an animal. It needs food. And these guys are going to help it out. So these zooxanthellae are going to live inside the coral. It's actually going to provide the coral its color too. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So you have plankton. The plankton are going to be they're actually an intermediate. They are very, very small animals, and they are going to feed on the microscopic organisms that are living within the coral and around the coral. So this plankton is food for anything that eats plankton. For example, fish, sea fans, feather stars. This is a very tiny list of a very large list. As you can see here, that plankton is, I'm sorry, those plankton eaters, feeders, they are then going to poop, right? They're going to die. They're going to drop pieces of their body, whatever that looks like. That is called detritus. Detritus is essentially organic matter that is no longer living. And that organic matter is then going to provide nutrients to the coral. Yes, this is going to provide sugars, okay? But there are more nutrients that is needed by the coral rather than just that sugars and glucose. Okay, so let's look here. So these organisms are then going to be food for predators. Predators such as larger fish, squid, snails. These are going to be your predators that eat this level. They fed on this level, which fed on this level. Okay, So there's one piece of it. If I kept it right here, that would be linear, and that would essentially be a food chain. But because this is not linear, everybody is kind of intermixed in terms of who eats what and when. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this section here. These are other organisms that are also going to feed on the coral, okay? Other fish, sea stars, crabs. So not only do they feed upon that coral, but the reason why they're over here, they'll feed directly upon the coral versus these plankton feeders feed upon the plankton that feed upon the coral. So that is more of a direct. And then these also can be food for your predators. They also produce detritus as they make waste, as they die. All of that organic matter is going to then feed that coral. Okay, same thing with the predators. They die, they make detritus. So let's look at the detritus feeders. So these organisms, they just eat detritus. They love it. So for example, you got your sea cucumbers, your worms, certain types of worms, amphipods, soft corals, a different type, right? They are going to produce coral, they're going to produce detritus, and boom. Uh, they will also eat the detritus. So they will produce it and then they will eat it. So they will also be food for predators. So do you see where the webbing is coming in? So let's go ahead and look at these photosynthetic organisms, such as seaweeds, coralline algae, photosynthetic bacteria. These are photosynthetic types of organisms. Okay, they're going to produce sugars. Also, when they die, produce detritus. Okay, they are then going to be food for animals such as grazers. You got fish, urchins, sea urchins, snails, chitones. Those are the ones that are going to go ahead and eat those photosynthetic organisms, and they will be eaten by the predators. So you can see that everybody contributes to the detritus, and this is one big web. Before we go on, if you have found this tutorial video helpful so far, please like and subscribe to support this channel in making more of these science tutorials. Thank you so much. Your coral ecosystems are going to be threatened by climate change, okay? So before we can talk about that, let's really learn where you find coral first. So coral is going to be found in the warmer waters, okay? More around the equatorial portions of the world, okay? Now, that is not exclusive because you're also going to find it in other areas that are either south of the equator or slightly north of the equator. So first of all, let's talk about what is the mechanism for climate change. This is your happy Earth, okay? If there were no atmosphere on Earth. Here's my happy sun. We can't blame the sun. He's doing his only job, and that is to provide energy. The sun is going to provide energy to the earth, lots and lots of energy. Some of that energy is going to be reflected back out into space. A lot of that energy is going to be collected in the waters of the earth. So here is a representation of the Earth's atmosphere. So the atmosphere is going to contain many, many gases. And this little gray portion that I've drawn here, that is ozone. It's O3. It is 3 oxygen molecules. It's a very important part of our atmosphere. It helps to keep those gases inside the atmosphere. 78% of our atmosphere is made up of nitrogen gas. We always talk about, in generalities, that we breathe oxygen, and yes, we do. We're breathing the air of oxygen, but really, the air that we breathe is only 21% oxygen. It is highly nitrogen, but the oxygen is so ultra important, we tend to just really talk about that. So let's talk about water. You got 1% of water. Basically, it's in the form of water vapor in the atmosphere. Sometimes you don't realize it really depends. If you live in Colorado, you really don't feel the water vapor in the air. If you live in Florida, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You feel the water vapor in the air. But even the clouds are basically a condensation of the water in the air. And then you have other greenhouse gases. So 1%, I should put those together, my apologies. 1% is the water and the greenhouse gases together. So that gives you an idea of how much water and greenhouse gases are truly in the air. So greenhouse gases are going to be carbon dioxide and methane. Okay. These are not the only greenhouse gases, but these are very, very strong, important greenhouse gases. And methane, CH4, is actually very strong. It's stronger than the carbon dioxide. Okay, so this little thing here, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. Chlorofluorocarbons, isn't that fun? Is a molecule that you will find in different propellants, okay? In the late 80s to early 90s, chlorofluorocarbons were actually reduced, not 100% banned, but if you ever use Aquanet hairspray, it was full of chlorofluorocarbons. And what they would do is it would punch holes in the ozone. If you have holes being punched in the ozone, that actually caused problems with the amount of energy coming through. So let's go ahead and look at a natural greenhouse because we actually do on Earth have a natural greenhouse. It is what makes life possible on Earth. The fact that Earth can maintain a quote, comfortable temperature. And that is possible because of these greenhouse gases and the ozone that is keeping those greenhouse gases in, which helps to moderate the temperature. So, what's happening here? You're having lots of energy come from the sun, lots of energy come from the sun, okay? Some of your Earth's water that it's not showing is going to absorb a lot of that energy. So some energy is going to leave, right? Some energy leaves. But some of that solar energy is actually not going to be able to get out because the greenhouse gases, the CO2 and the methane, are keeping it from leaving. So thereby the energy is going to return to the Earth. And the form of this energy, it actually comes in as light, but then it bounces around as heat. So this natural energy, that heat, is going to be sequestered inside the atmosphere, and that is what keeps the Earth warm enough for life. Okay, so this is a natural greenhouse, and it's necessary. But as you have, they call it anthropogenic, as you have anthropogenic influences, basically that is people influencing. So these are my little smokestacks. They're producing lots more CO2. You have yourself some cars. They're going to produce lots more CO2. You have your cattle and different type of ungulate animals. They produce a lot of methane in addition to the CO2 that they exhale. But I just put the methane there. What happens? Because of the overproduction of the CO2 from our technology, from our livestock, everything, the solar energy is able to come in, but as it leaves as heat, it gets stuck and bounces around back to the earth. Then it leaves, oh, it never leaves. It gets stuck because all of these additional greenhouse gases, they are keeping the heat from leaving the atmosphere. So that is literally building more and more heat within the Earth's atmosphere. And that is causing the Earth's temperature to increase at an increased rate that is not a natural rate. That's why they call it an anthropogenic greenhouse versus a natural greenhouse. So the question is, what is the significance? What's the significance of ocean temperatures to coral? Because that anthropogenic greenhouse is going to increase the oceanic temperatures, and that is very significant to coral. So let's look at this. Remember I told you about the zooxanthellae. So the zooxanthellae are actually going to live inside the coral. This is a coral, okay, a coral organism. Inside the tissues of the coral, you're going to have these zooxanthellae, those microscopic organisms living in there. They are going to provide that coral with oxygen. It also provides it with sugars because these zooxanthellae are going to photosynthesize. Provides it with sugars. The coral says, yum, yum, yum. That is wonderful. I love it. Thank you for the sugar. And those zooxanthellae is also going to provide it with fats. So in return, the coral is going to release carbon dioxide to the zooxanthellae. Well, the zooxanthellae is a photosynthesizer. And because it's a photosynthesizer, it needs carbon dioxide in order to photosynthesize and make the sugars. Coral is also going to provide phosphorus for that zooxanthellae and nitrogen. So with that, they have what is considered a symbiotic relationship, very specifically an endosymbiotic. So the zooxanthellae, because it lives inside the coral, it is an endosymbiont because it lives inside. And they together have a symbiotic relationship. They provide each other benefit. You could also call that mutualistic. You may have heard about this term bleaching, coral bleaching. And it's exactly how it sounds, except for the fact there's no bleach involved. There's my little air quotes, okay? So your healthy coral have a very beautiful, very specific color. Each coral has a different color depending on their species and the species of zooxanthellae living within it. But it has a very healthy color because the zooxanthellae are providing that color. Now, if the coral gets stressed, what'll happen is the coral will expel the zooxanthellae. It'll literally kick it out. It said, get out. I don't have time to do whatever it is we're doing together. I'm stressed. So what is stressing it? What is stressing the coral is change in oceanic temperature. Coral get very stressed under higher temperatures beyond what its normal limits are. Other things that can cause it to get stressed, runoff and pollutions. Okay, these can actually cause problems for the coral because it is giving it chemicals that the coral is just not able to deal with itself. Overexposure to light. Okay, you're going to find coral in a very specific area of the ocean. If that coral is exposed because you are having such extreme storms that is pulling water out and maybe even pushing it in where it's not getting enough light, that could be one or the other. So if you have extreme low tides, that's going to cause it to have extreme overexposure of light. If you have extreme high tides, that's going to give it the inability for the light to penetrate through the water. Alrighty, so what happens when the coral is stressed out and it kicks out the zooxanthellae? The zooxanthellae is gone. It's no longer inhabited in the coral, which means it's no longer providing that beautiful color. And what's left behind is coral that is very pale. It turns white mostly, and it's susceptible to disease because essentially it's, quote, starving. It's not getting the nutrients that it needs that was being provided by the zooxanthellae. So this is called coral bleaching. It's very vulnerable. When it is at this point of bleaching, it breaks off extremely easy. This is healthy coral, and this is bleached coral. This coral has that zooxanthellae living within it. This coral has already expelled that zooxanthellae and has lost its color of that microorganism. So the question is, can coral replenish? Yes. Living coral can replenish. It is a living soft-bodied animal. It has a calcium carbonate exoskeleton, okay? But we have some other implications that are going to be caused by the greenhouse gases that keep that coral from replenishing. And that is going to be ocean acidification. So check this out. Ocean acidification is essentially exactly how it sounds. The ocean water is becoming more acid state, okay? So how does that happen exactly? So I want to show you a couple of things. We have water, H2O, okay? We're going to make that simple. CO2, the plane dropped it off in the atmosphere. CO2 is a molecule that is very easily dissolved in water, okay? So the CO2 is going to get dissolved in the water. And when the CO2 gets dissolved in the H2O, it makes this molecule right here. This molecule is called carbonic acid. This carbonic acid is what you would call a weak acid. And being that it is a weak acid, what that means is, see how there's two H's here. So this carbonic acid, we'll put it over here so you can see it. It can break off and dissociate one of those hydrogens. It had two hydrogens. Now it's got one over here and the other one was with the rest of the molecule. This hydrogen is looking for a partner. It's looking for a bonding partner. But because carbonic acid is a weak molecule, it's a weak buffer, that means hydrogen is easily broken off from it. So really, that's not the best partner, but he's got a better partner in mind. Remember in previous slides, I had told you that the coral is a soft-bodied animal that uses this molecule, calcium carbonate, to build its exoskeleton. Okay, so that soft-bodied animal can reproduce and make more soft-bodied animals, but it needs an abundance of this calcium carbonate in order to make its very hard, protective exoskeleton. The thing about your calcium carbonate, it can break apart, dissociate, and break into the calcium atom and the carbonate molecule. When this happens, the carbonate molecule will actually react with a hydrogen and get together and partner up there. Okay? But when it does that, this calcium is left alone. If the carbonate would rather make a better bonding partner with the hydrogen, that's going to leave the calcium without a partner, meaning you don't have calcium carbonate being produced. And the reason why this is, just to back it up, CO2 came in, dissolved in the water, made carbonic acid, disassociated a hydrogen. The hydrogen, rather than getting back together with the original components of those carbonic acid, it instead gets with a carbonate. That hydrogen gets with a carbonate, thereby stealing all the carbonate availability and not being able to connect with calcium to make calcium carbonate. Well, even if you do have reproduction of coral, if you cannot have the exoskeleton for it, it is not going to do it any good. So once again, excess CO2 in the atmosphere is a consequence that is going to contribute to coral reefs dying. So the warmer the waters, the more violent the storms. This is another problem that comes from your global warming, your anthropogenic greenhouse. So let's go ahead and look here. So this is historical tropical storms, okay, 1842 to 2014. This is just showing when it's green, it's a lower storm. When it's red, it's a bigger storm. And you find everywhere in between. Okay, so you can see on the shores where you have the most extreme storms. Compare that to where the coral reefs are found. So your coral reefs actually act as a natural protector for storms. Your coral reefs are found just offshore, mostly. Okay, you're going to find them in other areas surrounding islands. You can have some atolls, which are basically free types of coral reefs a little bit further out in the ocean. But overall, you're going to find coral reefs near the coast. And because of those violent storms raging water, the coral reefs actually serve to buffer and protect the inland from those raging waters and violent storms. But the problem is, if you don't have healthy coral and your coral is bleached, it is brittle, it is breaking off. So thereby, those violent storms are now coming more inland than they would naturally. Now, there's another component on why these storms are so violent, and that has to do with the warming ocean waters. The warming ocean waters is actually going to increase the incidence of those violent storms, but that's for a different video. If you would like to hear the part 2 of this video about how oceanic temperatures increase the severity of storms, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Talk to you soon.